Welcome to Only Malware in the Building, where we're diving into all things spooky and magical this Halloween season. I'm Selena, also known as the Hermione of cybersecurity today. And with me are apparently two Harry Potters.
Asio explanation. Seriously, though, Dave, we talked about costumes. There's only supposed to be one chosen one, and clearly that's me. Look at my scarf. It's so lightning shaped.
Please, Rick. My scar is way more authentic. You look like you scribbled it on with a Sharpie in the car on a bumpy road.
Turn right on Diagon Alley. Your destination will be on the left.
Your costume is expellaboring.
How did you know?
Well, it looks like we've got a bit of a Horcrux situation here. Two Harry Potters, one show. Honestly, with the way you two are acting, I'm starting to think we should check for a polyjuice potion mishap.
Okay, let me see what I got here. I'm putting this thing together. This potion, eat slugs, Harry number 2.
Wow. Solid effort. For a second-rate Harry. Nicely done. Nicely done.
Okay. Before you two Avada Kedavra each other over who wore it best, let's focus on the real dark arts today. Malware, the Voldemort of the internet. You know, it's like the basilisk from the Chamber of Secrets. One wrong click and you're petrified.
Right, and just like with Tom Riddle's diary, malware hides in the shadows. It's sneaky, it's evil, and sometimes you don't even know it's there until, boom, you are hacked.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like how I didn't know Rick here was going to steal my costume idea. But Selena's right. It's like needing a Marauder's map to spot it. You need the right tools and a little Alohomora magic to unlock the truth behind those threats.
Exactly. And as we enjoy October's spooky nights of trick-or-treats and the annual Cybersecurity Awareness Month, remember to keep your digital defenses up too, whether against Death Eaters or hackers. And maybe next time, guys, we'll plan our costumes a little bit better.
I still look better.
Okay, you both win. Until next time, folks, remember, no matter what evil lurks in the building, we've got spells to keep you safe.
Mischief Mayonnaise.
Oh, that was... Wow.
Wow. I'm going to have to turn in my acting card on that one.
I'm amazed you ever issued one.
Well, I got it in the black market, so.
I see. I thought you got it in a cereal box.
Today, we're talking about Voldemort malware, Asio Voldemort malware. This is a fun cluster of activity that has some characteristics of e-crime with malware named Voldemort that has the capabilities for information gathering and espionage. It's spooky season, so the perfect time to talk about the malware threat actors named after the world's most notorious dark wizard.
I think I've told the story before, but the only reason I like cybersecurity is because we get to make up those cool names. I'm like,
yes.
Where else in
Right.
a professional setting can you name something Voldemort? So,
Right.
Well, this was actually named by the threat actors. It had the actual file names in their code in the malware, and we were able to spot that. And I thought, wow, I can't believe they did that. So threat actors have fun too.
That is pretty bold to be the ones who claim Voldemort.
Yeah.
Rick, I don't know if you know who Voldemort is. He's kind of like this generation's version of Darth Vader.
True. I got that. Yeah.
Voldemort. Lord Voldemort.
Well, let's dig in here, Selena. I mean, what do we need to know here? I guess the obvious question is, you kind of touched on it here. Why Voldemort? Is there any reason behind them naming it that, or is it just for bragging rights?
Literally no reason that we could figure out at all. It was the only Harry Potter reference, or really the only pop culture reference at all in the entire attack chain. But what I thought was pretty interesting about this campaign, and I called it out in the report that we wrote about it was suspected APT activity with cybercrime vibes. So the espionage objective, but using tactics, techniques, and procedures that we typically see from cybercrime and financially motivated threat actors. So this was a real head scratcher for me and the rest of the team.
Well, Dave, only you would try to ascribe some kind of serious motive to naming malware Voldemort. I mean, you know, gee, many curses. Everything you do is like so self-important. Jeez.
You know, Selena, I tried to watch Harry Potter with Rick, but halfway through he asked, so which one's Gandalf again?
Are you confirmed? You shall not pass!
It's the guy with the beard and the hat, right? That's Gandalf.
We had to take the remote away.
Dumbledore goes to the mines of Moria. That's the third book.
He might have done better there than Gandalf. I don't know. Just say that.
Yeah. Rick thinks Hogwarts is a rash you get from kissing a pig.
Oh, it's not. Huh.
All right. So back on topic here, Selena. Let's dig in here. What are we talking about with this group?
Yeah, so we don't actually know necessarily who is behind it, but the activity itself is very, very interesting. It was quite high volume, tens of thousands of messages. They impersonated tax authorities from various governments all over the world, including the UK, France, the United States, and some others. And they pretended to be the tax authority to kick off this very interesting attack chain that ultimately delivered this information gathering type of malware. In fact, it was pretty clever, the attack chain that was used, and we can get into it a little bit, but so much so between the lures, the attack chain, and then this very weird malware, we initially thought it was a red team. Like, oh, this is like very, very interesting sort of like red team activity, but given just ultimately the sheer volume of it, we're like, oh no, this is real, but this is very strange.
Now, my understanding reading through the research here is that they were using Google Sheets for command and control. How unusual is that?
It was pretty unusual. So I don't see it all that often. And when we were looking over it, it was pretty interesting. Essentially, they were using Google Sheets for command and control to be able to sort of like exfil and list all of the data that they would potentially be stealing or getting from victim hosts. And it was very odd, the way that it was set up.
So they were writing code inside of Google Sheets to grab information and dump it into a spreadsheet? That's what they were doing?
So they were dumping it into a spreadsheet, but they were using a different functionality. Once the communication was established, it would post to Google Sheets. But yeah, it was very interesting. Not something that we typically see, but kind of harkens back to what we talked about on our last episode about the abuse of legitimate services. I mean, again, obviously, Google Sheets is a very useful enterprise software and can be used by really anyone with a Google account, and a clever way of creating something and using a legitimate service maliciously. And we saw that actually with a few components of this campaign in general, right? Like the try Cloudflare, again, this temporary tunnel established by the threat actor. That's something that, again, is like a legitimate service, a temporary tunneling service. And then you have WebDAV as a file hoster, and then SearchMS, which is a way for be able to create file shortcuts, essentially to be able to access various malicious contents, and then ultimately downloading a malware that then used Google Sheets for command and control. So a very interesting use of a variety of things that we see in the e-crime landscape with increasing frequency, and this adoption by a potentially espionage actor was very, very interesting and kind of a little bit of a cocktail mix, if you will.
They just cut out the middleman, right, Dave? Because, you know, what they normally do is dump it down to a data file, and then they put it into a spreadsheet. They just said, we're going to eliminate that step and just dump it right in.
That's right. Well, what makes you confident that espionage is the objective here rather than like financial gain or traditional cybercrime?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think it kind of speaks to what we think about when we talk about how we do attribution and what we're able to decipher from motivation. So one piece of it was that the Voldemort malware was extremely custom. It was something that we hadn't seen before, only used by this particular activity cluster. Also, its capabilities. So it's very much seems to be mostly just trying to get information from whatever the host was. And then also the targeting and the specificity in their targeting, although it was very high volume, they had some interesting characteristics of their targeting to make sure that they were going after people in a language they would be typically speaking. They appeared to do a little bit of research on who they would be targeting at various organizations. And then finally, just the activity and the lures themselves were more typical of something that we might see with a state actor. They were pretty sleek, well done. And then ultimately, the function of Voldemort appears to be exclusively for information gathering and potentially could include a Cobalt Strike delivery down the road. We did observe that Cobalt Strike on the adversary's infrastructure, so a potential additional piece to that puzzle. But I do want to point out, we did say moderate confidence in the report. So, we have different various levels of confidence. So we do suspect that this is espionage.
So, Dave, let me explain what that means. They don't know. Okay? They don't know who this is about.
In cyber threat intelligence.
Oh, boy.
Here we go.
There are
Here we go.
words that are used to convey information.
Here's our lecture, Rick. Here's our lecture.
Let me get my notepad out.
Yeah, we're about to be schooled.
Well, I have to say, I think everyone who works in cyber threat intelligence, whenever they're asked a question, the answer is always, it depends. No matter the question, no matter what their answer is, the answer is always, it depends.
It depends with moderate confidence. Okay.
Yeah. So, you'll have to forgive Rick for his questioning here. He's so outdated. The last time he saw a server, it was a person carrying a tray of Denny's.
It was so good, too.
It was his early bird special. At his last job, Rick thought full stack developer meant you get free pancakes at work.
I'm still disappointed that didn't turn out to be true.
Let me ask you this, Selena. In the research, you and your Proofpoint colleagues there were multiple verticals that you established that were being targeted in this campaign. It struck me that insurance companies were the largest group. Why do you suppose they were a big target here?
So that's a really great question. And it does go back to the questioning of what is the ultimate goals and objectives. So we initially saw the delivery and then the potential communication with the command and control and not really any follow-on objectives. What was interesting was the lures were essentially impersonating tax agencies. So things like the Revenue and Customs in the UK or the IRS, so things that would be associated potentially with financial information or insurance in many cases. And so I think that the targeting kind of did align a little bit with some of their lures that were used. But yeah, I did think that was actually pretty interesting because it's not a typical vertical that you see oftentimes targeted, especially at sort of like these types of more high volumes by APT espionage threat actors, aerospace, transportation, and more sort of university or academia. That was a lot more aligned with what you typically see from, APT actors. And that's something that they were the ones that made up the sort of top 50% of targets. So yeah, the targeting was super interesting to take a look and sort of break down some of the verticals. It was a really weird campaign. Stay tuned. There's more to come after the break.
Ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits can strike without warning, leaving your business's sensitive data and digital assets vulnerable. But imagine a world where your cybersecurity strategy could prevent these threats. That's the power of the ThreatLocker Zero Trust Endpoint Protection Platform. Robust cybersecurity is a non-negotiable to safeguard organizations from cyber attacks. ThreatLocker implements a proactive, deny-by-default approach to cybersecurity, blocking every action, process, and user unless specifically authorized by your team. This least privilege methodology mitigates the exploitation of trusted applications and ensures protection for your organization 24/7, 365. IT professionals are empowered by ThreatLocker application allow listing, ring fencing, network control, and EDR solutions, enhancing their cybersecurity posture and streamlining internal IT and security operations. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help mitigate unknown threats in your digital environment and align your organization with respected compliance frameworks, visit threatlocker.com.
So they were impersonating government tax offices and then going after insurance companies. And what kind of information were they stealing?
So sorry, I'm going to have to cheat and look at my notes, you guys. It was literally like a 35-page blog.
Excuses.
I want to make sure that...
If we want it to be more than moderately confident, she has to look at her notes. Okay?
You don't have it memorized?
I know. Well, so essentially they were looking for information about the host. They could potentially observe various files, had commands to download or upload, stop the malware. You could see that they were potentially using things for information gathering. Initially, actually, they did some filtering on who was going to be able to click or interact with the actual malware. So they did based off of a user agent, for example. So they were definitely targeting Windows users. So they wanted to make sure from the very beginning, the malware was going to be going after potentially victims that had Windows. And if they weren't, then they were filtered to something else and just kind of collected very high level sort of logging of top level host information. But yeah, in terms of the actual capabilities of the malware, very kind of typical info gathering, potentially espionage types of capabilities and downloads and uploads features.
Did the target victims have to do anything special to defend against this, Selena? Or can just standard, keep your antivirus up to date kind of stuff, would have solved this?
So that's a really good question. And I actually thought it was kind of interesting because it was a little bit noisy, right? So again, they use these things, for example, like the Cloudflare tunnels. That's not something that is typically observed in a network, right? So if you saw that traffic in your network, you'd be like, oh, this is weird. That might flag some alerts if it's even allowed within the network, blocking some of these, like for example, Cloudflare, if it's not used for business purposes, is pretty good, especially now that we see it from a variety of different actor clusters. But then there was also the external WebDAV. So that connection to that external WebDAV is another thing that a lot of organizations might have restrictions on, not being able to access external resources that aren't safe listed within the organization. So it was kind of interesting. That's why, when we talk about this actor using more sort of typical e-crime threat behaviors, right? So it has these things that we've seen with a lot of other sort of cybercrime threat actors to deliver really commodity malware. And so in this case, they were using some things that were very similar and some that weren't. So while we have seen, for example, Search MS, which is a feature within Windows, it's the Windows search protocol that locally displays files hosted on a remote machine. So it's kind of like if the user saw this little pop-up, it would look like the file's actually on their host when it was really in the WebDAV. But in this case, they used a .searchms file. So that was actually a little bit of a twist on the sort of searchms functions or the technique that we see typically. So essentially using it as a searchms file saves a search. And so the Cloudflare tunnel essentially ended their URI with that searchms file, which was the save search, which was displayed locally on the host, when in fact it was actually on the WebDAV share. So it's kind of interesting because it's like uses social engineering to make the user think, oh, this is on my computer, like this might be okay. So trying to hide some of this activity. There's also a decoy PDF that was displayed to the user. So again, showing something that might seem trustworthy while activity is happening in the background, but also using kind of a little bit noisy techniques. So yeah, it was just kind of like I called it a Frankensteinian amalgamation of chaotic activity, which I feel is very appropriate for October.
I have to look all those words up in the dictionary, so I'll be right back.
A mess.
Yeah. Rick is so old.
They didn't invent those words yet? Is that where you're going with it?
I'll give you some perspective here. His boss asked him to create a container, and he asked if Tupperware was okay.
And now a word from our sponsor.
Meats keep meatier, beats keep beatier, chips keep chippier, dips keep dippier. Tupperware freshness, that's our promise. Look at all the ways we keep it.
And only I would have containers from a company that's out of business. Okay, that's how
right.
old I am.
That's right. That's right. His first experience with a computer was when it had punch cards. Now the most complicated punch card he uses is the one where he gets free coffee at the local diner.
Well, let me ask you this, Selena, because all those tactics, techniques, and procedures you were outlining, they all seem unique in some way. And your team of researchers couldn't associate that with any known adversary campaign, either nation state or crime, right? It's all kind of a mishmash of things.
Yeah, a mishmash is a good way to describe it. So we've sort of classified them right now as UNC, right? We've talked about that before.
Favorite.
UNCs. Yeah, that's sort of unknown. It might graduate to a TA when we have some more data available, or, if other folks find similar activity and publish on this in the community, we, would love to see other folks' thoughts on this. Not a known TA, but based off of some of the activity that we observed from it, their objectives, the malware itself, we do believe that this is APT/espionage activity. But yeah, it's definitely fun. And I have to give a shout out to my colleague, Tommy Majar, who initially found it and was like, WTF is this? Like, what's going on here?
That's kid slang, Rick. WTF is kid slang. They shorten things into just like letters, and it means things to them. Just so you know.
The firewall.
Yeah,
nice.
Exactly.
Good save, Selena. Good save.
So, Dave, this mismatch of TTPs is kind of like your dips when you get ready for the evening meal, right? It's a mismatch of all kinds of flavors.
That's true. That's true. And as we speak, I am sitting here right in front of me. I have a sun-dried tomato and basil pesto, which I would describe as a vibrant dip combining sun-dried tomatoes, fresh basil, Parmesan cheese, pine nuts, and garlic. It is bursting with Italian flavor.
Yummy.
Selena, let me ask you this. So the research talks about 20,000 phishing emails sent all over the world, which I think is a pretty impressive scale. Is there any chance that when you're talking about that kind of volume, that it's kind of like it's a misdirection to try to, you talked about things being noisy. Is it trying to cover a smaller, more focused set of targets? Is that kind of strategy in play here, or am I off base?
Yeah, that's definitely one possible hypothesis, right? So if a threat actor is trying to target a small handful of individuals, they might kind of just blast it out to misdirect from what they are doing. Similar in some ways to potentially covering up a espionage operation or a wiper operation as ransomware. It's like when an espionage actor, an APT actor might pretend to be a ransomware actor when really their objective might be a little bit different, have different motivations, but kind of cloaking it as something else. So it's one possibility. Again, we don't have enough data to say for sure that's what happened, but absolutely a sound hypothesis.
So what are your recommendations here? In terms of mitigations for organizations to protect themselves against this kind of thing, what do you suggest?
There are a few things. So certainly, like we mentioned, restrict access to external file sharing services. We've seen a lot of WebDAV. We've seen a lot of SMB all across the landscape, not just from espionage in this case, but definitely e-crime actors as well. So you want to make sure that the only communications are to those safe listed servers. Certainly blocking network connections to try Cloudflare if it's not required. Again, that's something, it's a temporary Cloudflare tunnel. So, probably not typically used in business operations. Once you sort of upgrade to the paid service, that's a lot more legitimate. If you're looking for things like that are using SearchMS functionality, we've seen not just in this case with the interesting .searchms files as safe searches, but also just monitoring for and alerting on the use of SearchMS in scripts, as well as suspicious follow-on activity like LNK, PowerShell execution. So the stuff that we see stemming from the SearchMS execution, accessing the external servers, LNK running unknown, unidentified scripts. So a lot of really yummy goodies in there for incident responders or for, SOC managers to be able to take a look at and protect their own environments. We'll be right back.
And we thank ThreatLocker for sponsoring our show. ThreatLocker application allow listing, ring fencing, network control, and EDR solutions enhance cybersecurity postures and streamline internal IT and security operations. Learn how at threatlocker.com.
I feel like after this conversation, I am going to need to drown myself in butterbeer after today's conversation. Maybe pair it with that tomato basil dip.
Couldn't hurt. Well, thank you, Selena. Interesting stuff. And I think Rick and I are going to run along here. We need to synchronize our pacemakers before we get on with the rest of the day. But interesting
Wait, is
stuff.
nap time soon, Dave? That's what I want to know.
Oh, Rick, when you're as old as you are, any time is nap time.
That's exactly right,
Rick just nods off in the middle of a meeting, and everybody just smiles and nods, and it's fine. It's all fine.
And yet somehow still absorbs everything in a dreamlike trance.
Oh, yeah. No, he can snap to right away, and he's as good as he ever was, which,
which wasn't that good. Yeah.
Yeah, your words, not mine.
And that's Only Malware in the Building, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. In a digital world where malware lurks in the shadows, we bring you the stories and strategies to stay one step ahead of the game. As your trusty digital sleuths, we're unraveling the mysteries of cybersecurity, always keeping the bad guys one step behind. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you ahead in the ever-evolving world of cybersecurity. If you like the show, please share a rating and review in your podcast app. This episode was produced by Liz Stokes, mixing and sound design by Trey Hester, with original music by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producer is Jennifer Ivan. Our executive editor is Brandon Karpf. Simone Petrella is our president. Peter Kilpie is our publisher.
I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Rick Howard.
And I'm Selena Larson. Thanks for listening.